Way back in 1565, the entire fate of Europe really came down to a tiny, sun-scorched rock in the middle of the Mediterranean. This is the incredible story of the Great Siege of Malta, a legendary and unbelievably brutal showdown that pitted just a handful of knights against the full might of an empire. Imagine this, it's May 18th, and you look out at the horizon, and it just turns black. A terrifying fleet of nearly 200 ships, one of the largest ever assembled, is descending on the island. This was the full power of the Ottoman Empire, and their mission was brutally simple: wipe the Knights of Malta off the face of the earth.
And this is where you really get the scale of what they were up against. The Ottomans brought an elite force of about 40,000 soldiers, and facing them, a mere 6,100 defenders, a motley crew of knights, some Spanish soldiers, and the local Maltese militia. This wasn't just a battle, it was a textbook David versus Goliath story.
So, the stage was set for what looked like a completely impossible siege.
It really makes you wonder, right? How on earth could this tiny island hold out? How could this small band of defenders possibly stand up against the most powerful empire on the planet at the time?
Well, to understand the absolute ferocity of this fight, we've got to rewind a little. See, this wasn't just some random attack. It was the bloody climax of a bitter rivalry that had been simmering for decades.
This timeline here kind of lays it all out. It really kicks off back in 1522, when the Ottomans booted the Knights out of their fortress on Rhodes. The Knights eventually get a new home on Malta, and they basically turn it into a hornet's nest, constantly raiding Ottoman ships. The final insult, the thing that really tipped the scales, came in 1564. The Knights captured a ship carrying some of the Sultan's most important people, and for the Ottomans, that was the last straw.
And you know, at the heart of this whole thing were two larger-than-life figures. On one side, you have the 70-year-old Grandmaster Jean de Valette. This guy was a battle-hardened warrior who absolutely knew no fear. And on the other, the mighty Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, a ruler dead set on finally crushing his old enemies.
So, the first chapter of this siege, well, it was going to be written in blood, all centered on a single crucial fort.
The Ottomans' first objective was Fort St. Elmo. You can see on the map here why it was so important. It was the key guarding the entrance to the Grand Harbor. If the Ottomans wanted to win, they absolutely had to take this fort.
And this is where the Ottomans made their first and maybe biggest mistake. They figured St. Elmo would fall in a few days, tops. But the defenders, pounded day and night by cannon fire, just refused to break. For over a month, they held on, fighting like absolute lions.
And the price for that miscalculation was just horrifying. By the time St. Elmo finally fell, 6,000 Ottoman soldiers were dead. That included half of the Sultan's elite Janissaries, the most feared warriors in the world. A devastating loss for just one small fort.
The fighting was savage beyond belief. I mean, after taking the fort, the Ottoman commander had the dead knights decapitated and floated their bodies across the harbor on makeshift crosses. De Valette's response? He had his Turkish prisoners beheaded, loaded their heads into his cannons, and fired them right back into the Ottoman camp.
So with St. Elmo gone, the full force of the Ottoman army turned on the Knights' last two strongholds, the little cities of Birgu and Sanglea. This was it. This was the fight for survival.
For weeks, the defenders were living in a hell of fire and steel. They had to endure what was probably the most intense artillery bombardment in history up to that point. One survivor claimed that 130,000 cannonballs rained down on them. Just think about that.
The city walls were just blasted to rubble. The fighting became this brutal hand-to-hand struggle in the gaps, just a chaotic mess of swords, pikes, and primitive grenades. At one point, in total desperation, the 70-year-old Grand Master, de Valette himself, grabbed a pike and led a charge, a true warrior to the end.
And then came the turning point. On August 7th, the Ottomans finally smashed through the walls of Birgu. It was over. The city was about to fall. But then, something like a miracle happened. A tiny group of cavalry from another city, Medina, launched a surprise raid on the Ottoman camp. It caused total chaos. The Ottomans, thinking a massive Christian army had finally arrived, panicked and retreated. They literally snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
That moment just broke the attacker's spirit. The fighting wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned for good, leading to a decisive, unbelievable victory for the defenders.
A month later, on September 7th, the moment the defenders had been praying for finally came. The Grande Soccorso, the Great Relief Force, landed. 8,000 fresh troops arrived from Sicily. For the exhausted, disease-ridden Ottoman army, this was the final nail in the coffin.
But the cost of this 4-month siege was absolutely terrible. The Ottomans lost as many as 35,000 men, a catastrophic defeat. But the defenders paid a heavy price too. The Knights lost about a third of their brothers, and Malta lost a third of its entire population. The island was a smoking ruin, but it had survived.
And you know, the stakes here were enormous. Even Queen Elizabeth I of England understood the danger. As she said, if Malta fell, it was anyone's guess what would happen to the rest of Europe. Malta was seen as the key that could unlock the whole Mediterranean. If it fell, there was nothing to stop the Ottomans from invading Italy.
The victory at Malta sent shockwaves across the continent. For one thing, it shattered the myth that the Ottomans were invincible. It also inspired a new sense of unity, which led directly to another huge Christian victory at the Battle of Lepanto. And on the ashes of the ruined city, a brand new, magnificent capital was built, Valette, named for the heroic Grand Master.
More than a century later, the famous philosopher Voltaire would declare, "Nothing is better known than the siege of Malta." It was a victory that just echoed through the ages, a powerful symbol of impossible resistance against overwhelming odds.
And that really leaves us with a final, lingering question. If that tiny garrison of 6,000 defenders had failed, just how different would the map of Europe and the world look today? It's a pretty powerful thought to end on.